They won't survive the winter, not without him, and not without it. The thought cut Anya like the icy Yakutian wind as she watched the hungry faces in her village. The legendary 500 kilogram, 11 pound buffalo, a mountain of meat and fury, was their only hope. No one dared. But with the spectre of starvation looming and the memory of her husband hunting in the snow, Anya, the widow, gripped the heavy bow, her old fingers trembling, and marched into the white expanse. And what she would find there would test not only her courage, but the very soul of her people. The weight of the bow was a familiar burden, but now, in Anya's hands, it seemed to carry not just wood and sinew, but the destiny of every soul in the village. Her eyes, once tear-filled, burned with icy determination. Akim's bow, her husband's, felt like an extension of her being, heavy and familiar. Every fiber of her body, accustomed to household chores and caring for her children, prepared for an impossible battle. The wind howled, an ancestral lament that pierced through the reindeer hides, but she did not falter. Her feet sank into the virgin snow, marking the beginning of a journey no one in the village believed she could complete. She didn't need to look back to feel the heavy gazes of her people. She knew every pair of eyes watched her, some with pity, others with silent despair, and perhaps a glimmer of hope. Her children, Lyudmila and Boris, aged 7 and 5, would be huddled by the fire, their empty stomachs crying out for sustenance. Their image, thin and pale, was the fuel for her courage. Akim, her beloved husband, would have left with the same determination. But he was a hunter, strong and experienced. She was just Anya, a widow, defying centuries of tradition. Tradition said a widowed woman did not hunt. Her place was in the home. But what flame could there be without firewood, without meat, without life? Ancestral wisdom, whispered in hushed tones, spoke of respect for nature, of listening to the ice and the wind, of reading the signs. Anya clung to these memories, to every lesson Akim had shared, to every story from her grandparents. She remembered how he had taught her to feel the earth beneath the snow, to identify the wind's direction by its scent, to predict a blizzard by the oppressive silence that preceded the storm. The biting air burned her lungs with every breath, and the infinite white of the landscape seemed to swallow her. The temperature of 71°, 95 degrees, was an invisible, relentless enemy, seeking every gap in her clothing, every exposed inch of skin. She knew the hunt would be long, perhaps days of tireless pursuit. The 500 kilogram buffalo was not just a legend, but a creature of legendary cunning, knowing every crevice, every hiding place, every natural trap in this vast, frozen land. Finding it would be a miracle, facing it madness, but madness was the only way out. With each step, Anya felt the energy of her ancestors flow, a silent force propelling her. She studied the snow, searching for any sign, any trace of the giant. Her eyes, accustomed to the small details of village life, now sharpened to the nuances of the wild landscape. A small mark on the ice, a broken branch, a puff of vapor carried by the wind. She was not a hunter by trade, but she was a mother, and maternal love was the sharpest weapon she possessed. The white expanse stretched before her, a monumental challenge. The village lay behind, a dark, diminutive speck in the icy immensity. Anya tightened her grip on the bow, feeling the cold wood against her gloves. There was no turning back. With each step, the grief of Akim's loss mingled with the urgency of her children's lives. She hunted not for glory, nor for adventure, but for survival, for the promise of a new dawn for her people. And so, under the pale Yakutian sky, Anya the widow, driven by a courage that defied death, began her search for the legendary buffalo, a tiny speck of hope in the relentless vastness of winter. Anya pressed on, her steps paced by the silent urgency she carried in her chest. The snow, a thick, uniform blanket, covered the landscape, making the reading of tracks a challenge even for the most experienced hunter. But Anya was no ordinary hunter. She was a mother, and her eyes, once focused on needles and threads, now scanned the whiteness with an intensity Akim would have admired. She remembered his words, spoken on cold nights by the fire. "The forest speaks, Anya. You just need to learn to listen and to see." She bent down, examining a small depression in the snow. It wasn't a clear track, but a subtle disturbance, as if something heavy had passed, compacting the ice beneath. Her gloved fingers touched the surface, feeling the texture, the compaction. It was a sign, faint but present. The buffalo was cunning, moving with surprising discretion for its colossal size. It wouldn't leave an obvious trail, not for just anyone. But Anya sought the invisible, the whisper of the wind carrying the scent of pine, and perhaps a hint of the animal. The cold was a constant presence, an icy embrace that tried to steal her warmth and hope. Her lips were cracked, despite having greased them with reindeer fat before leaving. With each breath, the icy air scratched her throat, and a dry cough began to manifest. She pressed her lips together, refusing to give in. The image of Lyudmila with her large, hungry eyes, and Boris, who tried to be brave but whose ribs showed beneath their thin skin, was a balm against despair. They depended on her. Hours turned into a frozen eternity. The pale sun barely rose on the horizon, offering a weak, heatless light before hurrying to hide again. Anya felt fatigue begin to weigh on her shoulders, a dull ache that threatened to paralyze her muscles. She knew she needed to rest, but every minute was precious. The hunger in the village would not wait. She remembered Akim, how he could walk for days, driven by a seemingly inexhaustible strength. She didn't have his physical strength, but she possessed a different resilience, forged in pain and love. She spotted a small rock formation, covered by a layer of snow. It would be a good place to shelter for a few moments, away from the biting wind. As she approached, her keen eyes noticed something. Not on the rock, but on the ground, near a twisted bush. Small marks, almost imperceptible, as if the snow had been disturbed by something large, but not violently. And a smell, a strong, earthy smell, which the wind for an instant carried to her. It was the smell of the buffalo. A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of recognition. Anya crouched, her breath forming small clouds in the air. She touched the snow, feeling the residual warmth. The buffalo had been there, perhaps just a few hours ago. Her lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The hunt was no longer a blind search. She was on the right track. Hope, a fragile yet persistent flame, ignited in her heart. She stood up, fatigue momentarily forgotten, and continued, her eyes fixed in the direction the scent and signs indicated. The bow in her hands felt lighter, infused with new determination. The buffalo was near. She could feel it. And the village, waiting, seemed to whisper her name on the wind. Anya, with her heart pounding in her chest, followed the almost invisible trail. Each step was a silent prayer, each breath a reminder of the biting air that tried to steal her strength. The earthy smell of the buffalo, once a distant breath, now became more present, mingling with the aroma of snow and resin. She moved with a caution she didn't know she possessed, her eyes fixed on the ground, searching for the next clue, the next disturbance in the immaculate whiteness. The fatigue, which threatened to paralyze her moments before, gave way to a cold adrenaline, keeping her senses sharp. The sun, a pale and indifferent disk, began its early descent, plunging the landscape into shades of grey and deep blue. The temperature seemed to drop even further, and the wind intensified its lament, whipping the snowflakes that began to dance in the air. A blizzard was brewing, and Anya knew this would complicate her hunt even more. The buffalo, cunning as it was, would use the storm to hide, to confuse its pursuers. But she couldn't stop. her children. Lyudmila and Boris depended on every minute of her search. She remembered Akim's stories about how large animals moved before blizzards, seeking shelter or positioning themselves to face the fury of the wind. The buffalo wasn't just fleeing, it was preparing. Anya needed to anticipate its movements, think like it, feel the earth like it. Her feet, despite the pain, continued to advance, guided by an intuition that transcended knowledge. She was a mother, not a huntress, but love transformed her into something more. Suddenly, the landscape opened up. Before her stretched a vast frozen lake, its surface smooth and mirrored, covered by a thin layer of freshly fallen snow. The ice beneath the white mantle looked dark and menacing. Akim had always warned her about the dangers of lakes in the harshest winter, when invisible cracks could give way under a man's weight, let alone a colossal buffalo's. But the trail, now more evident, pointed directly to the center of the lake. The buffalo had crossed. A shiver ran through Anya, not just from the cold, but from fear. Crossing the lake was an immense risk, a life-or-death gamble. She could see the buffalo's heavy trail, a series of deep depressions in the snow covering the ice. It had passed, but would the ice hold her weight? Her eyes scanned the expanse of the lake, searching for a safer point, an alternative route. But there was none. The buffalo had chosen the most direct, most dangerous path, perhaps to discourage any pursuit. Anya hesitated, the image of her children flashing in her mind. Lyudmila with her shy smile, Boris with his childish bravery. She could not fail. She took a deep breath, feeling the icy air burn her lungs. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind, "Listen to the ice, Anya. It speaks." She knelt, pressing her ear to the snowy surface. A faint sound, a distant crack, echoed beneath the ice. It was a warning, but also a confirmation that the ice was thick enough, at least on the buffalo's route. With the bow firmly in her hands, Anya took the first cautious step onto the frozen lake. The ice groaned softly under her weight, a sound that made her heart race. She moved slowly, distributing her weight, feeling every inch of the surface. The wind now howled more fiercely, raising swirls of snow that obscured her vision. The blizzard was upon her, transforming the landscape into a white, indistinct blur. But Anya continued, a tiny speck of courage in the relentless vastness of winter, following the buffalo's trail towards the unknown, her destiny and that of her village hanging by a slender thread over the treacherous and dangerous ice. Anya, a fragile speck in the white immensity, advanced over the frozen lake. The ice groaned and cracked beneath her feet, ghostly sounds that the blizzard tried to muffle. Each step was a gamble, an act of faith in the invisible thickness that separated her from the icy waters. The wind, a hurricane of ice and snow, whipped her face, reducing visibility to a few meters. Her heart pounded, driven by fear and the image of Lyudmila and Boris. Akim's voice echoed in her memory. Ice is a treacherous friend, Anya. Respect it, but never trust it blindly. She leaned against the wind, the bow firmly gripped, a beacon of hope. Her fingers, protected by gloves, lost sensation. The cold seemed to penetrate to her bones. A stronger cough shook her body, and she tasted the iron tang of blood in her mouth. Winter was exacting its toll. Suddenly, a different sound. Not the familiar crack of ice, but a deep creak coming from somewhere ahead, muffled by the storm. It was the sound of something heavy moving, the buffalo. It was still there in the blizzard, perhaps using the storm to camouflage itself. Anya stopped, eyes narrowed, trying to pierce the curtain of snow. The earthy smell, once faint, was now almost palpable. She knew she was close. Adrenaline surged again, pushing away fatigue and cold. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. Ancestral wisdom guided her. She began to move again, with even greater caution. The buffalo wasn't just ahead, it was close. Each step was silent, each movement deliberate. The bow was ready, the arrow nocked, though shooting in these conditions was almost impossible. She needed to get closer. The wind died down for a brief instant, and through the blizzard, Anya saw a dark, massive silhouette. It wasn't a rock. It was the buffalo, standing, imposing, almost invisible in the whiteness just a few meters from her. Its eyes, like two embers, seemed to pierce the storm, fixed on her. The colossal animal, with its curved horns and thick coat, was a vision of primordial strength, a challenge to existence itself. Anya felt a tremble. There it was, the legendary 5,000 kilogram buffalo, the hope and terror of her village. She could not retreat. Her children, her people, everything depended on this moment. The wind howled again, and the snow intensified, creating a veil between her and the beast. But Anya did not look away. She raised her bow, her gloved fingers trembling slightly, but her determination was unshakable. The battle was about to begin. There, in the heart of the blizzard, on the treacherous ice of the lake, where the destiny of a village and the courage of a woman would meet. Anya, with her bow raised, felt the wind tear tears from her eyes, not of sadness, but of the icy fury that surrounded her. The buffalo, a dark mountain in the blizzard, slowly moved its head, its eyes expressing an ancient intelligence and deep distrust. It was a predator, accustomed to dominating, and now a small human figure dared to challenge it in its own domain. The air between them vibrated with a palpable tension, a heavy silence that the storm could barely break. She remembered Akeem's words, not about hunting buffalo, but about hunting in general. It's not strength that wins, Anya, but the mind. The strongest animal can be outsmarted by the weakest, if the latter knows where and when to strike. Her muscles ached, her body trembled with cold and exhaustion, but her mind was sharp, focused. She didn't have Akeem's brute strength, but she had her own, a silent strength forged in a mother's resilience. The buffalo took a step forward, the ice cracking under its colossal weight. Its heavy hooves seemed to defy the surface's fragility. Anya knew that a direct confrontation was suicidal. She needed an opening, a weak point. Her eyes scanned the vast creature, searching for the vital spot Akeem had shown her in drawings in the snow years ago. The heart, the lung, places an arrow could reach, even if the distance was great and the wind a constant enemy. The blizzard intensified for a moment, and the buffalo seemed to disappear into a white veil. Anya seized the opportunity. She moved laterally, shuffling her feet carefully to make no sound, trying to flank the animal. The ice beneath her groaned, and she felt a different, deeper vibration. A crack? Fear chilled her veins, but she could not stop. Lyudmila and Boris, their hungry faces, were the melody that propelled her. The buffalo reappeared, turning its head, as if sensing her presence through the storm. It snorted, dense vapor streaming from its nostrils, and stamped a hoof on the ice, a clear warning. Its red eyes fixed on her again, and Anya felt the weight of 1,000 years of animal instinct. It was not hatred, but a cold, calculating perception of a threat. She raised her bow again, the arrow already nocked. Her gloved fingers, despite the cold, found the string, pulling it with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The bow's tension was immense, and her arms trembled. She needed a clean shot, a shot that would make a difference, but the wind was against her, and the snow blinded her. Anya closed her eyes for a brief second, concentrating. She wasn't just shooting an arrow, she was launching the hope of her village. She opened her eyes and saw. The buffalo had turned slightly, exposing a flank for an instant. It was her chance. A silent prayer escaped her cracked lips, mingling with the wind's howl. With a sigh that seemed to tear her soul out, Anya released the string. The arrow flew, a dark blur against the white of the blizzard, propelled by all her courage and despair. The sound of impact was muffled by the storm, but Anya saw. The arrow lodged itself in the buffalo's thick hide, not in the exact spot she aimed for, but close enough to cause a reaction. The buffalo let out a deep roar, a sound that made the ice vibrate beneath Anya's feet. It shook its head, and the arrow, stuck in its flesh, seemed to irritate it more than gravely wound it. Its eyes, once merely distrustful, now burned with fury. It charged, heavy and determined, towards Anya. The battle, which had begun with a dance of cunning, now transformed into a desperate race for survival, in the heart of the blizzard, on the treacherous ice. Anya knew she would need more than one arrow to bring down the giant, and time was running out, relentless. The buffalo charged, a dark, furious mass bursting through the blizzard. The ice beneath Anya's feet trembled with the impact of each colossal hoof, and she felt the tremor rise through her legs, a visceral warning of imminent danger. There was no time to hesitate. The image of Lyudmila and Boris's hungry eyes burned in her mind, more vivid than the cold itself. She could not retreat, but neither could she face that brute force head-on. Akim's wisdom, whispered on quiet nights, returned to her. The ice has memory, Anya. It keeps the marks of what crosses it, the cracks that weaken it. Anya did not run blindly. Her eyes, sharpened by necessity, scanned the icy surface before her. She remembered the faint, cracking sound she had heard as she approached the lake, a sound that now seemed to echo louder in her memory. There was a line of weakness there, a point where the ice, though covered by snow, was thinner, more prone to giving way. It was a risky gamble, but the only one she had. With surprising agility for her exhausted body, Anya veered to the right, not fleeing directly, but moving in a calculated arc, luring the buffalo to the spot she had identified. The animal, blinded by fury and the pain of the arrow in its flank, followed her without hesitation. Its massive horns, capable of tearing the strongest flesh, seemed to want to reach her with every step. The air filled with the buffalo's hot, heavy breath, and Anya felt the warmth of its menacing presence right behind her. Then it happened. The buffalo, in its relentless charge, stepped with all its colossal weight on the exact spot Anya had predicted. With a deafening crash that overcame the blizzard's howl, the ice gave way. It wasn't a simple crack, but a massive fracture, an abyss that opened up beneath the animal's front hooves. The buffalo bellowed in surprise and pain, its gigantic body partially plunging into the icy water that bubbled and instantly froze upon contact with the air. Anya stopped abruptly, turning to see the scene. The buffalo was trapped, its front legs sunk into the crevice, its body tilted, struggling desperately to free itself. The fury in its eyes now mingled with a primordial panic. The ice around the crevice continued to crack and give way, threatening to swallow it completely. It was an unexpected turning point, a turn of events that not even Anya, in her despair, could have imagined. Nature, in its relentless indifference, had intervened, transforming the buffalo's strength into its own trap. Anya felt a mix of relief and a fresh wave of fear. The buffalo was vulnerable, but the ice, now more unstable than ever, was a danger to both. She could feel the vibrations of new cracks spreading across the surface. Her children, her village, now depended not only on her courage, but on her ability to act with surgical precision amidst the chaos. The bow in her hands felt lighter, but the responsibility heavier than ever. The hunt was not over. It had merely changed form, and the danger, from treacherous, had become unpredictable. Anya watched, her heart hammering against her ribs as the buffalo struggled in the icy crevice. The water, dark and treacherous, seemed to suck the warmth from the air, and steam rose in dense clouds. The animal's bellow, once of fury, was now of despair, a guttural sound that echoed in the blizzard's vastness. The surrounding ice continued to give way, thin cracks spreading like spiderwebs beneath the snow. Anya knew she couldn't delay. The buffalo, even trapped, was a force of nature, and the ice an enemy to both. Her eyes, once fixed on the animal's struggle, now turned to the bow in her hands. The arrow, still nocked, seemed to carry the weight of the entire village. She remembered Akim's lessons, not just about hunting, but about life in winter. When opportunity presents itself, Anya, do not hesitate. Hesitation is death in the cold. She needed to act, not out of cruelty, but out of a brutal and undeniable necessity. Her children, Lyudmila and Boris, were waiting. The village depended on her. With slow, calculated steps, Anya approached the crevice, maintaining a safe distance from the unstable ice. The buffalo, its head still raised, fixed its red eyes on her, a mix of pain and rage. It was a gaze that could paralyze anyone, but Anya did not allow herself to falter. She raised the bow again, her arms trembling not only from exhaustion, but from the gravity of the moment. The blizzard for an instant seemed to calm. As if nature itself held its breath, she aimed, not at the vast body, but at the vital spot Akim had taught her, the place where life resided and where an arrow could bring a swift and merciful end. It was a difficult decision, but a necessary one. Her fingers, almost frozen, pulled the string with renewed strength, driven by love and despair. A silent prayer, a promise to her children and to the spirit of the buffalo, escaped her lips. The arrow flew. This time there was no deviation, no hesitation. It lodged itself with icy precision, and the buffalo's bellow transformed into a deep groan, which slowly faded. The animal's colossal body shuddered, and then, with a final sigh that mingled with the wind, it gave way, sinking further into the icy water, but remaining trapped in the crevice. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the occasional crack of the ice. Anya lowered her bow, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Her legs gave way, and she knelt in the snow, exhaustion finally overcoming her. Tears, warm and salty, streamed down her cold, etched face, not of sadness for the creature, but of overwhelming relief and the silent pain of a task accomplished at such a high cost to her soul. She had succeeded. The buffalo, the legendary 500 kilogram buffalo, was brought down, a promise of life for her people. But victory was only the beginning of a new and monumental challenge. How to drag that colossus out of the crevice, with its hooves still trapped in the ice forming around it? How to get it back to the village, kilometers away, through the seemingly endless blizzard and the treacherous ice that now proved even more dangerous? Her body was exhausted, wounded, and the cough returned with greater force, tearing at her throat. She looked at the animal, a mountain of meat and hope, and the vastness of the task overwhelmed her for an instant. Her mind, however, refused to surrender to despair. The image of Lyudmila and Boris, with their pale faces and hungry eyes, rekindled a stubborn flame in her chest, a force that surpassed any physical pain. She could not stop now, not after everything. Resilience, forged in the fire of pain and the purest love, was her only companion. With immense effort, Anya stood up, staggering, and began to think, her eyes scanning the scene for a solution. The village waited, and Anya, the huntress widow, would not fail. Anya watched, her heart hammering against her ribs as the buffalo struggled in the icy crevice. The water, dark and treacherous, seemed to suck the warmth from the air, and steam rose in dense clouds. The animal's bellow, once of fury, was now of despair, a guttural sound that echoed in the blizzard's vastness. The surrounding ice continued to give way, thin cracks spreading like spiderwebs beneath the snow. Anya knew she couldn't delay. The buffalo, even trapped, was a force of nature, and the ice an enemy to both. Her eyes, once fixed on the animal's struggle, now turned to the bow in her hands. The arrow, still nocked, seemed to carry the weight of the entire village. She remembered Akim's lessons, not just about hunting, but about life in winter. When opportunity presents itself, Anya, do not hesitate. Hesitation is death in the cold. She needed to act not out of cruelty, but out of a brutal and undeniable necessity. Her children, Lyudmila and Boris, were waiting. The village depended on her. With slow, calculated steps, Anya approached the crevice, maintaining a safe distance from the unstable ice. The buffalo, with its head still raised, fixed its red eyes on her, a mix of pain and rage. It was a gaze that could paralyze anyone, but Anya did not allow herself to falter. She raised the bow again, her arms trembling not only from exhaustion, but from the gravity of the moment. The blizzard, for an instant, seemed to calm, as if nature itself held its breath. She aimed, not at the vast body, but at the vital spot Akim had taught her, the place where life resided and where an arrow could bring a swift and merciful end. It was a difficult decision, but a necessary one. Her fingers, almost frozen, pulled the string with renewed strength, driven by love and despair. A silent prayer, a promise to her children and to the spirit of the buffalo, escaped her lips. The arrow flew. This time, there was no deviation, no hesitation. It lodged itself with icy precision, and the buffalo's bellow transformed into a deep groan, which slowly faded. The colossal body of the animal shuddered, and then, with a final sigh that mingled with the wind, it gave way, sinking further into the icy water, but remaining trapped in the crevice. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the occasional crack of the ice. Anya lowered her bow, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Her legs gave way, and she knelt in the snow, exhaustion finally overcoming her. Tears, warm and salty, streamed down her cold-etched face, not of sadness for the creature, but of overwhelming relief and the silent pain of a task accomplished at such a high cost to her soul. She had succeeded. The buffalo, the legendary 500 kilogram buffalo, was brought down, a promise of life for her people. But victory was only the beginning of a new and monumental challenge. How to drag that colossus out of the crevice, with its hooves still trapped in the ice forming around it. How to get it back to the village, kilometers away, through the blizzard that seemed to have no end, and the treacherous ice that now proved even more dangerous. Her body was exhausted, wounded, and the cough returned with greater force, tearing at her throat. She looked at the animal, a mountain of meat and hope, and the vastness of the task overwhelmed her for an instant. Her mind, however, refused to surrender to despair. The image of Lyudmila and Boris, with their pale faces and hungry eyes, rekindled a stubborn flame in her chest, a force that surpassed any physical pain. She could not stop now, not after everything. Resilience, forged in the fire of pain and the purest love, was her only companion. With immense effort, Anya stood up, staggering, and began to think, her eyes scanning the scene for a solution. The village waited, and Anya, the huntress widow, would not fail. Anya dragged herself to the edge of the crevice, where the ice seemed firmer. The buffalo's body, colossal and inert, was an insurmountable barrier. She needed to free it from the frozen embrace. Akim always said that nature, however relentless, offered its own tools. Her eyes scanned the bow and the remaining arrows. They were not for cutting. She needed something more robust. She remembered the small ice axe Akim always carried with him on long journeys, a gift he had given her years ago, kept in his leather pouch. With trembling fingers, Anya pulled it out. It was heavy, the icy wooden handle cold in her gloved hands. With the axe, Anya began to strike the ice around the buffalo's front hooves. Each blow was a painful effort, her entire body protesting against the movement. The ice shattered into sharp shards, some flying and scratching her face, but she did not stop. The cough returned, more violent, and she tasted the familiar tang of blood. The sight of her children, thin and hungry, was the only thing that kept her standing with every gasping breath. Time seemed to stretch and shrink, and the blizzard continued to swirl around her, a white maelstrom that threatened to swallow her. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. The sense of time had been lost in the cold and exhaustion. Slowly, painfully, the ice began to give way. The buffalo's front hooves, once trapped, now had a little more freedom. Anya felt a thread of hope. It wasn't enough to drag it, but it was a start. She needed more. She needed a lever, a fulcrum. Her eyes fell upon a twisted tree trunk, half buried in the snow a few meters away, perhaps brought by some ancient flood. It was heavy, but perhaps it could serve. With superhuman effort, Anya dragged the trunk to the crevice. She positioned it carefully under the buffalo's shoulder, using the firm ice as a fulcrum. With the axe, she dug a resting point for the log, trying to create the slightest leverage possible. Then, using all the strength she had left, she pushed the log down. The ice groaned. The buffalo moved. Not much, but enough for one of its front hooves to completely detach from the crevice, sliding onto the solid surface of the ice. A sigh of relief escaped her lips, mingling with the icy vapor. It was a small miracle, a tiny yet crucial victory. The other hoof was still trapped, but Anya knew the worst was over. She had a plan, and hope, once a mere thread, now burned brighter in her chest. The village waited, and she, Anya, would not disappoint them. Anya moved the log carefully, repositioning it to get a better angle on the buffalo's remaining hoof. The intense cold, which once seemed a constant enemy, was now a silent ally, helping to solidify the ice she had broken, creating firmer points of support. Her muscles screamed, every fiber of her body seemed in protest, but the image of Lyudmila and Boris's eyes, so vivid in her mind, was a balm for the pain, a promise that every effort would be worth it. With the ice axe, she struck again, not with the fury of before, but with methodical precision, breaking the last icy bonds that held the animal's hoof. The sound of metal against ice was a somber rhythm in the white expanse. Her fingers, numb despite her gloves, could barely hold the handle, but she persisted, driven by a force that came from deep within her, a reservoir of resilience she didn't even know she possessed. The cough returned, a dry tear in her throat, and she felt the damp warmth of blood on her cracked lips, but she did not stop. Finally, with a last push on the log, the buffalo's second hoof detached from the ice, sliding with a wet, heavy sound onto the surface. The colossus was free from the crevice. Anya stepped back, gasping, observing the mountain of dark meat against the white snow. A mix of relief and a fresh wave of dizziness hit her. She had conquered the buffalo, the ice, the exhaustion, but victory was only half the battle. How to move a 5,000 kilogram animal alone, across kilometers of snow and treacherous ice? Her eyes scanned the vast creature, and a new wave of despair threatened to engulf her. It was impossible to drag that. Akim, in his stories by the fire, always spoke of the importance of respecting the animal, of using every part, of not wasting. And he also spoke of intelligence in hunting, not just in the capture, but in the logistics. A wise hunter, Anya, knows that the hunt only ends when the meat is in the pot and the hide on the body. Anya knew what needed to be done. It was a monumental task, one that would require all her strength and all her ancestral wisdom. She would need to butcher the colossus. It was not a task for a woman alone, especially an exhausted and wounded one. But there was no choice. The village depended on her. With the ice axe in one hand and Akim's hunting knife, which she had tied to her belt, in the other, Anya approached the buffalo. She knew she would need a stable surface to work on, and the ice, however treacherous, was her only table. With slow, deliberate movements, she began to process the animal. Each cut was a reminder of the life that had been taken, and the lives that would be saved. The cold would help preserve the meat, but it would also make every movement more difficult, more painful. She needed to be quick, efficient. The blizzard, though still present, seemed to have lessened its intensity, as if nature itself was watching, waiting to see if the small Yakutian widow could complete her impossible task. Anya took a deep breath, the icy air burning her lungs. Her mind was focused, her eyes fixed on the task ahead. Her children, her village, her hope. She would not fail. Anya would not fail. With Akim's hunting knife sharp and familiar in her gloved hands, she began the most arduous task of her life. The colossal body of the buffalo, once a living threat, was now a mountain of frozen meat, a gift from nature and her own courage. The intense cold, which once seemed an enemy, now became an ally, helping to preserve the meat, but at the same time making each cut a battle against the rigidity of the ice and the animal's muscles. Her fingers, already numb and sore, could barely hold the knife, but necessity was a fire that burned stronger than the cold. She remembered Akim's words about reverence for the life that was taken and the importance of wasting nothing. Every movement was precise, guided by years of observation and by wisdom passed down through generations. She knew where to cut, how to separate meat from bone, how to prepare the pieces so they could be transported. It was slow, brutal, and solitary work. The blizzard, though less intense, still enveloped the scene in a white veil, and the wind's howl was the only melody in her exhausting symphony of effort. The cough returned in waves, tearing at her throat and leaving a metallic taste in her mouth. She felt weakness in every muscle. But the image of Lyudmila and Boris's hungry eyes was a balm for her pain, a promise that every effort would be worth it. Anya worked tirelessly, her movements becoming more automatic as time passed. She cut large pieces of meat, carefully separating them and piling them on the clean snow beside the animal. The steam of her breath mingled with the icy air, forming small clouds that quickly dissipated. The sun, if it existed at all behind the heavy clouds, was already beginning to set, and the winter darkness was setting in, bringing with it an even more penetrating cold. She needed a sled, something to carry all that abundance back to the village. But there was no sled, only the white expanse and her own exhausted body. Her mind, however, refused to surrender to despair. Akim always said that intelligence and creativity were a hunter's greatest tools. She looked at the twisted tree trunk she had used as a lever. It was heavy, but it could be adapted. With the ice axe, she began to trim the ends of the log, trying to create a more manageable shape, something that could slide over the snow. It was improvised work, but she had no other choice. Each blow of the axe sent a sharp pain through her arms, but she persisted, driven by the vision of her village, of her neighbors, all depending on her. As she worked on the log, her eyes scanned the landscape. The blizzard had diminished even further, revealing a gray, desolate horizon. The frozen lake, once treacherous, now seemed a vast expanse of hope. She needed to bring the meat back. She needed to bring hope. The task of butchering and carving the buffalo was monumental. She knew she couldn't carry everything at once. She would have to make several trips or find a way to signal the village. But time was a relentless enemy, and the cold threatened to freeze the meat into unmovable blocks. She needed a plan that took into account her exhaustion, the cold, the distance, and the colossal weight of what she had achieved. Her mind, despite the exhaustion, worked frantically. She remembered how the oldest hunters, in times of extreme need, used the animal's own hide to create a kind of improvised sled. It was a bold idea, one that would require even more effort, but it might be the only way. With new determination, Anya turned to the buffalo, no longer as prey, but as a source of resources, a gift she needed to honor. She would begin to remove the hide, a meticulous and heavy task, but essential for transport and for the village's warmth. Each movement was an act of faith, a silent prayer that her strength would not abandon her children, her village, her promise. She would not fail. Anya, with Akim's knife, began the task of removing the buffalo's hide. It was a job that required not only strength, but almost infinite patience. The hide, thick and frozen, clung to the animal's body with a tenacity that seemed to defy her efforts. Each cut was a test for her numb fingers and exhausted muscles. She knelt in the snow, bent over the creature, the steam of her breath forming dense clouds in the icy air. Daylight was fading fast, and the winter darkness began to swallow the landscape, bringing with it an even more penetrating cold. Her eyes, burning with fatigue, fixed on the task, ignoring the pain radiating from her shoulders and back. The cough returned, stronger, and she tasted the metallic tang of blood in her mouth, but she did not stop. The image of Lyudmila and Boris, with their pale faces and hungry eyes, was a beacon in her mind, a promise that propelled her with every movement. Slowly, inch by inch, the hide began to give way. It was a brutal process which made her sweat under her heavy clothes despite the bone-chilling cold. She used the ice axe to help loosen the most stubborn parts and the knife for precise cuts. When the colossal hide was finally removed, she spread it on the snow, a dark, heavy blanket, larger than she had ever imagined. It was the base of her improvised sled. With the tree trunk she had trimmed, Anya began to tie the ends of the hide using leather straps Akim always carried in his hunting pouch. Each knot was a challenge for her stiff fingers, but she tightened them with fierce determination. The log would serve as the pull bar, and the hide as the platform that would glide over the snow. Next came the hardest part, loading the pieces of meat onto the improvised sled. Each piece was incredibly heavy, and Anya needed all her strength to lift them and place them on the hide. She started with the smaller cuts, but soon found herself struggling with pieces that seemed as heavy as herself. Her arms trembled, her knees buckled, but she continued, piling the meat carefully. Ensuring the weight was distributed as evenly as possible, the pile of meat grew, a mountain of hope and survival. When the sled was as full as she could bear, Anya prepared for the first test. She took the leather straps she had tied to the log and passed them over her shoulders, positioning herself to pull. Darkness had already completely swallowed the lake, and the stars began to dot the sky, cold and indifferent. The wind howled, mocking her effort. With a groan of effort, Anya pulled. Her feet slipped on the snow, and she felt the pain tear through her muscles. The sled did not move, not an inch. Despair threatened to engulf her, a cold deeper than winter's own. But then the image of Lyudmila and Boris, their thin faces and pleading eyes, flashed in her mind. She could not fail. Not now. With a hoarse cry that mingled with the wind, she pulled again, with all the strength she had left, and then some. Her muscles protested, but this time the sled groaned, and with a slow creak it began to move, dragging itself through the snow. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, but it was a movement. Anya felt a pang of hope, small but stubborn. The village waited. She would not stop. Anya did not stop. With every fiber of her being, she leaned against the leather straps, her feet slipping and finding purchase on the compacted snow. The improvised sled, laden with the promise of life, dragged itself with agonizing slowness. Every inch gained was a victory against the relentless vastness, against the cold that bit at her bones and the exhaustion that clouded her mind. The cough returned, tearing at her chest, but she ignored it, pressing her cracked lips together. Lyudmila and Boris, their pale faces and hungry eyes, were the invisible force that propelled her, the silent melody that kept her from giving in. She was not just pulling meat, she was pulling hope, the future of her family and her village. Meanwhile, in the village, anxiety was a heavy cloak that suffocated everyone. Elder Ivan, with his wise and worried eyes, watched the darkness of the horizon. Anya's prolonged absence, especially after the blizzard, weighed heavily on his heart. He had seen many winters, many losses, and the idea of a woman, widowed and alone, challenging the legendary buffalo was almost unthinkable. But Anya's courage, The determination in her eyes before she left had left a mark. "She is not a man, but her soul is stronger than many," he had murmured to himself. With a heavy sigh, Ivan gathered a small group. "We need to look for her," he said, his voice hoarse with worry, "even if it's just to bring her body back. We cannot leave her alone in the cold." The small group, composed of a few young hunters and old Yelena, who insisted on going, set out with flickering lanterns. The snow, now calmer, reflected the faint starlight, making the landscape even more ethereal and desolate. Hours passed in tense silence, only the sound of their footsteps in the snow and the distant howl of the wind. It was Yelena, with her vision sharpened by a lifetime of experience, who first spotted a dark speck on the horizon, moving with an almost imperceptible slowness. "There!" she exclaimed, pointing with a gloved, trembling finger. As they approached, the sight became clear. Anya bent over, dragging a mountain of meat. Shock and disbelief overcame them, followed by an overwhelming wave of relief and admiration. Anya, almost blind with exhaustion, barely noticed the approaching lights. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, one step after another. When Ivan and the others reached her, she could barely lift her head. Her lips were blue, her face etched by exhaustion and cold, but there was a glimmer of triumph in her eyes. "Anya," Ivan whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He didn't need to say anything more. The young hunters, overcoming their astonishment, quickly joined her, tying ropes to the improvised sled. With their combined strength, the heavy burden began to move more easily. Anya felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from the effort, but from the human connection, the solidarity that enveloped her. The journey back, though still long and arduous, was filled with new energy. The village lights, once a distant point of hope, now grew with each step. When they finally crossed the village limits, the sound of cries of relief and joy echoed in the icy night. Lyudmila and Boris, their faces streaked with tears and smiles, ran into their mother's arms, who embraced them with the little strength she had left. The sight of the meat, piled on the sled, brought a chorus of exclamations and tears of gratitude. Hunger would be kept at bay. The village would be saved. Anya, the widow who dared to defy the impossible, not only brought meat, but rekindled the flame of hope in every heart, forging a new legend in the frozen vastness, proving that true resilience lies in the silent strength of those who refuse to give up. The village erupted in a chorus of voices, a mix of relief, joy, and awe. The children, once pale and silent, now ran around the sled, their eyes wide at the mountain of meat. Lyudmila and Boris, their faces still wet with tears, clung to Anya's legs, who knelt, embracing them with all the strength she had left. Her fingers, once stiff with cold, now caressed her children's hair with an almost painful tenderness. Elder Ivan, his eyes brimming with tears, touched Anya's shoulder, a gesture of respect and gratitude. "You saved us, Anya," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The fire in the village's central bonfire, which had flickered with scarce firewood and even less hope, now crackled with new vigor. Small pieces of the colossal buffalo meat roasted were distributed. The smell of warm food filled the air, a long-forgotten aroma that made stomachs rumble and hearts warm. People ate slowly, savoring each piece, their eyes meeting in reverent silence. It was not just food for the body, it was food for the soul, a promise that life would continue, that the cruelest winter would be overcome. Anya watched her children eat, their faces regaining color. Exhaustion still enveloped her, but the sight of them, safe and fed, was her sweetest balm. The night advanced, and the village, which had once retreated into a silence of despair, now echoed with whispers of admiration and gratitude. The old women, who had once shaken their heads in disapproval of Anya's audacity, now looked at her with newfound respect. "She is more than a widow," commented Yelena, her eyes shining in the fire's warmth. "She is Akim's strength and the wisdom of our ancestors, all in one heart." Tradition, which dictated everyone's role, seemed to have bowed before the necessity and courage of a woman who refused to accept her imposed destiny. Anya had not just hunted a buffalo. She had hunted down the doubt, fear, and despair that haunted everyone. In the days that followed, the village transformed. The buffalo meat was carefully stored, ensuring that hunger would not return anytime soon. The hides were processed, promising warmth and protection. But more than the supplies, what Anya brought back was a change in the community's spirit. People began to work together with renewed vigor, sharing tasks and stories, their laughter and voices filling the icy air. The story of Anya's hunt spread, told and retold by the fire, becoming a living legend, a reminder that strength can come from the most unexpected places, and that love for one's family and community can drag 5,000 kilogram buffaloes. Anya, though still bearing the physical and emotional scars of her journey, found deep peace in her heart. She had honored Akim's memory, not just by wielding his bow, but by embodying his wisdom and courage. Her children saw her with eyes full of admiration, and the village saw her as a beacon of resilience. Winter, though still harsh, no longer seemed so oppressive. There was warmth in the cabins, food in the pots, and above all, hope in their hearts. The frozen vastness of Yakutia remained relentless, but Anya's small village had discovered an even more powerful truth: that unity, faith, and the courage of a single heart can ignite a light that even the cruelest winter cannot extinguish. The light Anya had ignited with her courage continued to burn, warming the hearts of the village long after the colossal buffalo's meat had been stored and its hides transformed into garments and shelters. The initial euphoria gave way to deep gratitude and renewed purpose. The harsh realities of Yakutia, with its relentless cold and the struggle for survival, persisted, but the spirit that faced them was irrevocably transformed, stronger and more united. Anya, once seen as the silent widow, now walked with an aura of palpable respect. Her days were still filled with daily tasks, but she performed them with a stillness that radiated serene strength. She found solace in the rhythm of life, watching Lyudmila and Boris regain their color and liveliness, their laughter echoing through the cabins, a constant reminder of what she had achieved. The grief of Akim's loss still accompanied her, a soft shadow, but now intertwined with a profound sense of accomplishment and a legacy forged by her. She was no longer just a hunter's wife, she was Anya, the huntress, and her gaze carried the wisdom of the snows. The village, inspired by her example, began to face challenges with renewed vigor and unprecedented cooperation. They shared resources more readily, helped each other with cabin repairs. Collective hunts were now planned with a wisdom that combined the experience of the elders with Anya's boldness and cunning. The old divisions and silent despair were replaced by a palpable sense of community and solidarity, visible in smiles and gestures of support. Nightly gatherings around the fire, once marked by laments, were now filled with stories of hope and audacious plans for the future. Elder Ivan, with his wise eyes and a restrained smile, watched Anya with silent and profound admiration. He saw in her not just a heroine, but a natural leader who had emerged from extreme necessity, breaking invisible barriers. Ivan understood that true strength resided not only in physical prowess, but in the indomitable spirit that could move mountains, or as in Anya's case, drag a 5,000 kilogram buffalo through the snow. He began to weave Anya's story into the village's ancient legends, ensuring that her courage would inspire future generations, a living testament that tradition could be shaped by necessity and the unshakable strength of the human heart. Lyudmila and Boris, now well-fed and safe, carried their mother's story in their own bright, curious eyes. They understood the sacrifice, courage, and determination that had saved them from hunger. They were growing up in a transformed village, knowing that even the impossible could be overcome with love and an unwavering will. Anya taught them not only to survive the rigors of Yakutia, but to thrive, to always seek the light even on the longest nights, to find strength within themselves, just as she had done on her epic journey. And so, the cruelest winter began to recede, making way for Yakutia's brief, vibrant spring. But the lessons learned would endure, etched into the soul of every villager. Anya's feat was an eloquent testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a beacon that shone brightly against the world's vast, frozen canvas. It was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, a single act of courage, born of love and despair, could change everything, carving a new path of hope for an entire community and etching the legend of Anya the huntress into the immortal heart of Yakutia.